Welcome back to part 2 of Kicking Mystara to 1030 AC. Now we're looking at the following nations in the line: Rockhome, Vestland, Ausland, the Soderfjord Jarldoms, and the Gnomish Kingdom of Falun. One is brand new to the known world, two fought the armies of the Master, and another sided with Iadis, and the third sat out the war entirely. So how does that reflect decades later with the political structure of the known world shaken up? I'm Mr. Welch. Everybody grab a hammer. It's time to rebuild. The Dwarves of Rockhome have mixed feelings about the war, as the only thing that got them involved was Darrican's gold. Lots of Darrican's gold. Every dwarf trained to swing an axe fought in the war as a mercenary. None did it out of loyalty to their ally. Rockhome's army acquitted itself well in multiple battles, but took heavy losses towards the war's end as they held the center against the Master. Despite Darrican filling King Everest's coffers for the use of the dwarven troops, many dwarven leaders didn't feel like this was their problem. The Master's armies would smash against the walls of Carrock Castle, as the orcs did long ago at the Battle of Sardal Pass. The wealth earned from the war served Rockhome well, at least for a while. The army recovered its losses quickly, and Rockhome paid its soldiers bonuses to join. Engineers built new roads and renovated dams to increase water flow to power the forges. Everything was going wonderfully in the caverns of the dwarves, but the devastation of the war slowly caught up with the craftsmen and the merchants. No one could buy their goods in large numbers. Typically, Rockhome sold excess goods to Darrican, but the nation of coin was half-leveled. Alfheim was more concerned about dealing with the Shadow Elves than maintaining relations with other countries. While Vestland was an emerging economic power, they preferred different markets. The Rockhome economy started to stagnate. Internally, doubts began to crop up around King Everest and his leadership. He was considering allowing the craftsmen to seek work outside of Rockhome. But the problem was dwarven pride was pricing their work out of the market. Dwarves were superior carpenters and masons, but towns burned to the ground don't have the gold to hire them. The nation was wealthy, but all that extra gold was useless because there was nothing to buy. The Herwarf clan leaders, Durik and Bifia, decided it was time for the repossessed to move on to the throne. The rise of Falun gave them that chance. When the gnomes retook their homeland, they pushed out tens of thousands of kobolds. One of the gnomish inventions caused a massive earthquake felt as far away as the dwarven capital of Dengar. The Trimmer opened a sealed passage and released the still-living King Dinwarf, the first king of Rockhome. This ancient being was the first dwarf, the one Cagiar created to lead the race at its creation. Dinwarf announced to all that he was reclaiming his throne, which King Everest opposed. Clan Herwarf threw its support behind their founder Dinwarf, along with several other clans, and Rockhome found itself in a civil war. King Thar took advantage of the conflict and the sudden expulsion of kobolds and other humanoids from the area to raise a new army and march on Carrock Castle. The dwarven troops set aside their differences and pushed the humanoids back. Still, the kings realized they were equally matched in the field and decided to settle the civil war with a combat of champions rather than tear the nation apart as the armies ground themselves to dust. The king and their champions met on the field of honor in the battle to the death. Everest proved to be no match for the first dwarf, who makes quick work of the Everest champions, leaving only Everest and his son Boffin remaining. But before Dinwarf can finish the wounded king, he goes mad, turning on his own forces. He killed half his remaining champions before Prince Boffin and the remaining Dinwarf champions could put down the insane usurper. In the following minutes, King Everest XV died of his wounds, and the surviving Herwarf champions swore fealty to Boffin. The civil war was over. For their part in the civil war, Durik and Bifia, the Herwarf clan leaders, were sentenced to exile, where they were both given a small garden and little else to do for the rest of their lives. Boffin breaks with tradition and takes the name Boffin I instead of Everest XVI. He is a capable king, though a dour one at times. The dwarves foolishly hoarded their gold in the post-war strife and squandered it in their civil war. He sends the craftsmen and the laborers to the other lands to help with the rebuilding at a fraction of the average dwarven rates. This greatly helped speed up the restoration of Darrican, and other nations like Karamikos, Athengar, or Vestland welcome the dwarves. The Hins still want nothing to do with them, much less the Glantrians. Boffin I is a capable king and recognizes problems before they become emergencies. He is known as the Grim King due to his nature. He rarely smiles, even to his advisors. He treats every issue facing him with the same focused attention. A minor flood is treated with the same urgency as an orc invasion. He's a difficult ruler to understand, as he reacts with the same stone-faced expression to good news as to bad. He's not a popular king, but he's a respected one. The dwarves might not like him, but they do appreciate his ability to get things done. The fate of the northern nations is a mixed one, from great success to absolute failure. Vestland took its newfound popularity with the western countries, and used it to further their transition from a nation built on war and raiding to a more mercantile one. They'd always been known for their skill at crafts, but now with the fall of Darrican and the isolation of Minrathad, they had a captive market. Vestland goods were snatched up by the Ethengar, with their newfound wealth looted from the Master's army. Wood and stone goods arrived in other nations through caravans and ships as fast as they could be loaded. King Harold was quick to capitalize on the opportunity the war presented. Vestland spent the Darrican gold paid to supply troops for paving roads, building merchantmen, and modernizing its docks. Soon Vestlandic goods were pouring into Darrican, Yularum, Thyattis, and beyond. With the fall of Ausland to Thyattis, Vestland found itself the most powerful of the northern reaches. Life was good for the new merchant power. Then events from outside their borders hit like a hammer. The first conflict was the war with Minrathad. Vestland discovered the hard way what happens if you try to encroach upon Minrathad waters, as several of their ships were attacked and seized. Pirates began to target Vestlandic merchant ships as soon as they passed Thyattis waters. The war started when King Harold laid a trap. A pair of pirate ships set upon a Vestlandic merchantman coming out of Vanya's girdle. The Strait of Water, not the Immortals' actual undergarments. When the ship was boarded, the pirates discovered the actual cargo. A couple of hundred Vestlandic warriors. Pirates might be hardened killers, but they were no match for several dozen frothing Northmen. The Vestlanders captured both ships and found the captains to be privateers in service to Minrathad. The long-lingering trade war of the known world had just turned hot. Vestland sent out raiders for the first time in a century, all headed south towards the guilds. The Minrathad-Vestland War only lasted 6 months, as the nation spent little of it fighting on land. Merchant ships were the primary target. The distance between the two countries meant an actual occupying force was impractical. The Vestlanders found unusual allies with the undersea nation of Seaholm, who had little love for the Northmen but a burning hatred for Minrathad. Other ships joined the Vestlanders, coming from Karamikos, the Shires, and even Irendi. The tipping point of the war was the Battle of Harbour Town, where half a dozen Vestlandic longships slipped into the harbor undetected through the use of magic. The target was the docks, along with the warehouses and ships found there. And the city of Minroth could see the fires that night nearly 50 miles away. Minrathad sued for peace. They still had the numbers to fight, but they didn't have the will without allies. Wars are expensive, after all. Irendi worked out the peace accord, where both sides would avoid each other's ports, but leave the other shipping alone. The treaty forced Vestland to avoid Minrathad waters, meaning either they hug the coast or they swing wide south. Minrathad could not sail north of Thyattis, unless they headed to the Isle of Dawn. Vestland didn't have the political power to get concessions, but their victory established them as a trading power. One that might not have the most money, but one that could defend itself far better than its competitors. The second event that impacted Vestland was the Fall of Soderfjord. With the splintering of the Jarls and the invasion of King Thar, Vestland absorbed many refugees fleeing their southern neighbor. King Harold took in as many as he could and pressed the fighting men arriving into service to protect the merchants, and build an army that could hold back Thar's legions if it moved north. Vestland's newly acquired wealth has been redirected partially to its military modernization. Landers Fjord is one of the most heavily fortified borders in the known world, with the Vestland side buttressed by dwarven-built fortresses, the finest weapons and armor the Vestlanders could craft, and gnomish-built war machines ready to unleash hell if Thar tries to cross the river. It's a massive drain on resources, but the alternative is unthinkable. King Harold II now rules Vestland and has learned much from his father's wisdom. It's a wealthy nation in 1030, though not as powerful as the rebuilt Darrican or Minrathad. They're known for their quality products, fast caravans, and their ability to defend their goods better than anyone else. The treaty with Minrathad still holds, but now Vestland wants to expand its territory. It has reached the Isle of Dread, and has several colonies dotting the coast on that faraway island. They've even begun trading with Alphatia, though the wizards still distrust the Northerners because of the Auslandic actions during the war. Ausland remained a nation occupied for decades. When the Heldonic Knights conquered the poorly defended country during the War of the Wizard, Thyattis made a point of liberating their allies. Or at least everybody thought they did. Emperor Eusebius took the opportunity to land even more troops on Ausland to try and threaten Norwald. Then the Auslanders realized they were not going to be a free nation anymore. King Hord Dark-Eyed died suddenly on his longship off the Isle of Dawn coast, never seeing his nation again after the war. The crown fell to his oldest son, Finn Hordson. He was a puppet of the Thyatian Empire, but his mother taught him how to play their lethal games. Finn cooperated with the Thyatian governor and worked with them to put down insurrections or revolts before they happened. In return, the Thyatians left Finn to run the nation. As long as the tribute poured in and the Auslandic auxiliary never lacked troops, Finn was allowed to run the government as he saw fit. Under his mother's guidance, he modernized his nation. He learned to fake a crisis to get more aid from the Thyatians. 10 years into the occupation, he had the reputation of being a timid yet loyal member of the empire. The king was far from it. His mother taught him to play along to get what they wanted. In the first decade with him as king, he saw Thyatian soldiers pave every road in Ausland as mere make-busy work. Auslandic raids were permitted, but only under a false flag and against a target favorable to Thyattis. Fortunately, Soderfjord and Norwald had plenty of targets. Many of Finn's rivals viewed him as a weak figurehead, but he was playing the long game. Thyattis had tens of thousands of soldiers stationed in Ausland. They were organized and they were happy to be in what they thought was an easy post, though they did complain about the cold. If anyone made life hard on them, then their laid-back attitudes would change. Finn planned to keep the Phaeacians fat, happy, and lazy. In return, they would rubber stamp his decisions. His first test was from his brother Geir. The younger brother of Hord believed in following the old ways, even though Theodas was well established in Ausland. Most men of fighting age had been pressed into military service, leaving Geir few that could overthrow the occupiers, and even fewer of prime age. Still, he insisted, and despite his brother's dire warnings, moved on the Phaeacian governor. The Phaeacians crushed the revolt in a single night. Despite the family bonds, Finn personally signaled the headsman to execute his brother. This impressed Emperor Eusebius even further, who responded by reducing the Phaeacian garrison and giving Finn Darkeye even more autonomy. It took 20 years, but Ausland finally regained a degree of independence due to the Alphatian Civil War. The conflict between the followers of Prince Xandor and Crown Princess Arafne spilled over its borders into the Isle of Dawn and parts of Norwald. Theodas, wary of intervening, was finally forced when Xandor's assassins attempted to murder Eusebius's children in retaliation for Theodas offering Prince Tridorian refuge during the war. Eusebius had no feelings for Ariadne's youngest son, but Tridorian did spend several years in Theodas as a hostage, and he was a politically useful tool. Theodas ordered its ships to attack Xandor's troops where they could be found. Finn offered to lead the Auslandic auxiliary personally, which Theodas gave him as an afterthought. Eusebius didn't even realize what he was signing when presented with the request. Finn had one shot, and that was to earn an imperial boon. Rather than relying on a frontal assault that the Alphatians were waiting for, he took a dozen hand-picked men and a merchant ship flying false colors. Posing as a newly formed Vestlandic trading cartel, he used every bit of his diplomatic skills to butter up Prince Xandor to gain access to Aquis. Finn wagered that the vain Alphatian prince could not tell the difference between a Vestlandic accent and an Auslandic accent, and would be too busy obsessing over all the free tribute being presented to him. And he was correct. The Alphatians were expecting an attack from the air or a magical assault by wizards, not a tiny handful of supposed Vestlandic merchants. Finn played up the part and offered up barrel after barrel of mead to the prince, each barrel containing a more robust vintage. Xandor's hubris got the better of them, and he wanted to hear more of the silver-tongued Finn's tales. Finn toasted the prince, the guards, and everyone in the room and emptied barrel after barrel of mead. The revelry distracted everyone so much that they never noticed how clumsy the Auslanders were, as they kept spilling every bit of their drink after their first few mugs. When the Phaeacian fleet approached Aquis, they intercepted a merchant ship flying Vestlandic colors. On board was King Finn, his small band of men, and a very well-bound, gagged, and hungover Xandor. While the Alphatians had vaporized each other with magics, Finn ended the war by targeting Xandor's biggest weakness, his oversized ego. The story behind Finn's great victory grew with every telling until the legend of the king, who drained an entire barrel of mead in a single gulp to best the Emperor of Alphatia in a drinking contest to the death, finally reached the ears of Eusebius. The Emperor didn't believe the stories he was hearing. Still, when Finn handed over Xandor without a single drop of blood spilled, even the laconic Emperor couldn't contain his admiration. Eusebius offered Finn an imperial boon, and like Duke Stefan Karamikos decades earlier, Finn asked for complete autonomous control of Ausland. The Emperor was impressed with the Auslanders' gumption. King Finn had done his homework. Some provisions in boring economic rules involving tariffs and port fees were required, but Ausland was free again. When Finn returned home, the legends had already reached his people. They didn't believe it until the morning before their king returned. The Phaeacians just got on their ships and left. King Finn Darkeye of Ausland returned to thunderous applause and a nation ready to return to the world stage. Where Vestland had prospered and Ausland was reborn, Soderfjord is a shattered remnant of the nation. The loosely allied Jarls never really changed. Ragnar the Stout became the High King because of the war raging around his country. The nobles grudgingly accepted, and he got the army ready for battle to reach Soderfjord. While Theodas and Alphatia's wrath hit nations around Soderfjord, the conflict never reached their shores. Ragnar wasn't done being king when the war was over. He started trying to unify the Jarls and expand Soderfjord's influence to surrounding areas. Theodas was weakened, Ausland was conquered, and Norwald was left unprotected for large areas. Soderfjord's time was now. Or it would have been if the Jarls didn't Jarl. Ragnar never saw his dreams come true. With the emergency gone, the reason behind his rule was over, according to his detractors. A few of his rivals died of mysterious causes, a common happening when Soderfjord's politics turned heated. When Ragnar had Jarl Gunthorm Brittlebone executed for an unauthorized attack on the Vestlandic town of Bjornbank that left dozens dead, the other Jarls had had enough. In a bloody battle, Ragnar was ambushed on the road by forces of Jarls allied against him. Both sides were practically annihilated in the clash, but Ragnar the Stout's rule ended on the road to Castellan. Ragnar's death was traumatic, as Jarl fought Jarl out of revenge, outstanding feuds, or to be the next war chief. Thousands died in pointless battles, and Vestland, Theodas, and Yalarum fortified their borders to prevent the slaughter from spilling over. After several years, the latest in another Soderfjord Civil War ground to a halt as the petty nobles were too tired to fight anymore. But the damage had been done. Soderfjord had condemned itself because of its Jarl's selfishness. Deep in the Hardanger Mountains, an incalculable number of kobolds happily occupied the empty caverns of the once great gnomish nation Falun. They occasionally ventured out to raid nearby human settlements, but not enough to earn a unified response. Elsewhere around Soderfjord were numerous gnoll camps with giants and trolls also in good numbers. They were a nuisance but never a grave threat. 2 battles changed that. The Second Battle of Sardal Pass saw the exiled Orc King Thar try and storm Castle Carrock to reach the interior of Rockhome. This attack unified the warring dwarves. Rather than smash his ragtag army against the walls of the dwarven castle, Thar instead withdrew to the east. He still had tens of thousands left over from his legion of old, and picked up reinforcements from the various humanoid tribes he encountered. In comparison, his numbers weren't enough to threaten a whole nation, but that was only a temporary problem. The kobolds of Hardanger had lived in their caves and in the fallen gnomish cities for centuries. Then one day in 1015, the kobolds were interrupted by a single large canister launched into one of the largest cave openings. Out of the canister spewed a poison gas that killed all it touched. Following the canister were numerous constructs, along with gnomes in special suits of armor that protected them from the gas. The retaking of Falun had begun. The kobolds were slaughtered in mass. Hundreds of thousands choked and died in the first hour. The gnomes cleaned out every cave with poison, fire, and fell machines they had spent all those years in exile constructing. The supreme symposium of gnomish syndicates had come in force. Now there was going to be a reckoning. No more waiting, no more preparing, no more mercy. Falun would be retaken, no matter how many had to die on the battle. The kobolds fancied themselves tinkers, but nothing could have prepared them for the onslaught that awaited them. Mechanical dragons incinerated the kobolds that tried to fight. The poison gases reached into every nook and cranny, leaving no survivors. Kobolds were never brave creatures. They quickly broke and ran north into Soderfjord proper. There they were assaulted by gnomish airships that carpet-bombed them into oblivion. Many gnomes thought the slaughter was excessive, but their pleas went ignored. 9 out of 10 kobolds were dead, but tens of thousands escaped, right into Soderfjord. King Thar reached Soderfjord days before the gnomish blitz liberated Falun. He was there to make a deal with the Modrig's work, as he needed an edge to become a threat to the world again. He encountered the fleeing kobolds and made them a deal. Well, an offer. An offer that ended every request with the words, "or else." The kobolds joined his army, and after a brief pause to organize them, Thar launched a full assault into the province of Nordkassel. The defenders only had a population of 8,000. Thar had a force 20 times that. The conquest had begun. The Jarldoms were bled white because of the internal strife. Thar's legion was at full strength because of the kobolds, gnolls, and trolls flocking to his banner. If he'd attacked anywhere else, he could have been stopped, but not in Soderfjord. The towns fought alone, the Jarls moving to protect their lands rather than unifying to stop Thar. Sortfeld fell, then Backwater, then Lerum, and finally the capital of Soderfjord itself. The Jarls tried to unify after Thar sat on the throne of the High King, but it was far too late. Humanoids poured into Soderfjord from their lairs by the tens of thousands. The remaining Soderfjorders were too few and too spread out to put up a serious defense. Finally, Vestland and Yalarum opened up their borders to survivors that could escape by land, and King Finn of Ausland, with Thaetian support, evacuated who he could by sea. Within a year, Soderfjord was no more. The gnomes were quick to establish a government in their liberated homeland. It was technically a kingdom, but the various gnomish syndicates compromised the parliament, which held equal power. The gnomes' gas was targeted towards kobolds. It did minor damage to the subterranean ecosystem by design. The gas broke down in components shortly after being unleashed, leaving a rutabaga-scented sheen that evaporated in a few hours. The gnomes involved in the battle numbered only a few thousand, but they were just the first wave. The gnomish diaspora was over, and soon they flocked to Falun. Other nations were initially thrilled to hear of the tremendous gnomish victory and the establishment of a friendly country in a region known for its hostile population. Rockhome quickly sent an ambassador. Even Yalarum, Thaetus, and Karamikos recognized the nation immediately. But rumors started to leak about exactly how the gnomes had won their homeland. A Darrican diplomat wrote back of the kobold dead piled 20 feet high for as far as the eye could see. Sorain's gnomes were initially giddy over the news, resulting in a week-long celebration in the city. But when they flew over the new homeland, they saw the pits of kobolds burning outside the entrances. The smell of the burning corpses permeated the city. The Falun gnomes didn't just drive the kobolds out, they massacred them. The kobold dead reached easily over 1 million. The Falunian gnomes didn't care. The end justified the means. Falun was back, even if it meant Soderfjord had to die. The international response to Falun is guarded. Everybody liked the gnomes, but nobody had any idea what they were truly capable of. All of the surrounding nations wonder what other war crimes the gnomes would be willing to commit to get what they wanted. Nobody wanted the kobolds as neighbors, but gassing an entire civilian population was entirely different. There's also the matter of the various agencies and nations wanting gnomish technology. The military creations are well guarded, but the technological marvels being excavated daily by the gnomes are another matter. There's even a rumor of the gnomes developing an alchemical substance with the same properties as the smoke powder from the Savage Coast. But that's probably just a rumor. Thus concludes Part 2 of the 1030 timeline. This originally was supposed to cover every book to the Broken Lands, but the Northern Reaches were 3 different nations and I didn't want to skim over them. Plus I don't like leaving plot hooks hanging, and it was time for the gnomes to go all verdun on the kobolds. I will get Part 3 up as soon as I can, but until then, remember, there's no kill like overkill.